Hey, all you rad dads out there.
Welcome to the Rad Dads Show. Who are you?
Yeah, I don't know my name is Ray Cappo, aka Raghunath. I teach yoga internationally, but in my youth I was sort of like a hardcore punk rock singer of a band called Youth of Today. Youth of Today was early 80s New York hardcore. Um, and unlike the rest of the hardcore that was happening in New York in the 80s, we were drug free. Didn't drink or smoke, and we were strict vegetarians, and that created a unique little bubble within that already alternative scene. And I thought it was going to just be our thing, but it turned out to be tens of thousands of other people's thing too. So we got a lot of followers from that, and it made Youth of Today one of these seminal bands in a genre that got created from that. And so every now and then I still get asked to do a Youth of Today reunion, even though I'm 58-year-old man with 5 kids and, you know, later when I was 22, I quit the band because I found it wasn't fulfilling my mind. Um, Even though I felt like it was a good message, and I went off to become a monk for 6.5 years. And, and a weird, plot twist, I started another band as a monk that became bigger than the first band called Shelter. And Shelter toured internationally. And I somehow lived in an ashram and created a record label while in that ashram. Anyway, it's a long, winding story and a very interesting story. And I found it interesting only after I wrote my book, which just came out, called Punk to Monk. I just thought it was a peculiar story, but it was actually very interesting to the point where, like, I reread my book and I go, this is a pretty interesting story, especially, from the punk scene juxtaposed to the monk scene, you know, placed in the backdrop of, India, pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre credit cards, when you used to travel internationally without credit cards, was a crazy time. And so it makes for a fun story and one of those, spiritual journey books, like a modern day autobiography of a yogi. So I'm honored to be here on the Rad Dad podcast. I got to see if I'm qualified to be rad. I'm going to leave that up to you or your viewership.
There we go.
Maybe my kids could chime in if they think I'm rad enough.
Yeah. So yeah, expand on it. You're a dad. You said you're a dad of five.
Yep.
And do you consider yourself a rad dad?
I tell my kids I'm rad. They don't understand like what other dad options are out there, but I mean, I was like, sometimes when my kids disrespect me, I was like, hey, come on. I was thinking of a band, I skateboarded. I've taken you guys all over the world when you were little kids. Hey, how many kids get to go to India on a regular basis? Nobody, you know, um, you know,
Do they
so
recognize that? Do they kind of,
what's that?
are you just their dad? It's like, oh, okay, you've done all of these things that you've kind of mentioned, or do do they think that? Do they?
I think they think it's sort of cool sometimes, I, yeah, I think the to impress the kids is, I think every kid looks up at their dad as a hero, even if their dad's a complete jerk or abusive. A dad has a figure of a parent where the kid will always look up to that dad. Matter of fact, sometimes it really screws them up if their dad's abusive or creates trauma in their life, yet they hold that position of elder. So whether I'm rad or not doesn't really count. I think it with a father figure, it's how much love you can give the kid and validation and remove their type of fear and give them a type of safety. So whether I'm rad or not, I don't think that's sort of the metric for being a good dad. Um, uh, but whether you can give the person a nest that they can grow and they can develop their own responsibility. That's the sort of the next level dad. I think that's important. And that's what I'm trying to work on more than trying to be cool in their eyes, just trying to be good in their eyes.
Right. So what are some traits that make one a rad dad? And that's, I put it in quotations, and it's not meant to be jokingly, but it's really, we've looked at in this podcast, we've had over 100 kind of dads and kind of get the perspective on parenting, and we always leave that question or lead with that question and leave it a bit loose in the sense that, how do you define rad? Like from my perspective, a rad dad would be, synonymous with a good dad, and there's lots of various traits that make one a good parent. What are some traits that you think make one a
Well,
rad
it's funny because I'd use this word on us in high school, rad. It was a California word, really. But I grew up in Connecticut and we skateboarded, so we said rad. So rad was from radical. And so radical was, doing things that were sort of out of the boundaries of what was normal. So we cut our hair weird, or wore an earring, or wore peculiar clothes, or skateboarded in the times when nobody skateboarded. So that was considered rad or radical. That being said, if we mean like rad is just like a good thing. My dad was a rad dad. He was not radical at all. He was like a school teacher, had the same job as long as I've known him for. We had a completely stable life. He was like a loyal husband. He was a good provider. He was super strict and gave me tons of parameters. And he wasn't like the most like I play with my kids. I like am a friend of my kids. We do things like that. I didn't play much, if not at all, with my father. My father was sort of an authoritarian. He'd say, you know, very often you just hear, get out of the house, don't come back till dinner time. We were left to play with our playmates and make friends. And if there was no one out on the street, we'd have to go figure out how to play with nothing. And that would happen also, just ride a bike. There was no play dates. I never went for a play date was a very rare thing where you're getting driven to somebody's house. It was just try to find a friend in the neighborhood. If no one's home, make up a game by yourself. So I don't think my dad was rad in that regard. He didn't have a crazy haircut, didn't do crazy things, but he was a stable dad. And in my opinion of what rad means, I think he was good. He was good for me to have to give me the tools to work in this world. Okay, to make it through this world. Sometimes perhaps maybe I'm too rad and I should pull it back a little bit to help my kids. I think sometimes I'm a little bit too of an enabling dad, or I'm a little bit too of a little bit of a helicopter dad, hovering over the kid. My dad, he gave me some tough tools, some tough school. When every other kid was saying, "Hey, you want to go to university?" We had 7 kids in my family, and the big push in my generation was everybody should go to college. Every kid should go to college. A lot of kids, that's how you're going to make it in this world. But my father was never too pushy. He always said, "Yeah, you want to go to college? I'll completely help you go to college. I won't pay for a dime of it, and I'll help you fill out all the forms for scholarships. And if you want it, get good enough grades where you can get the scholarships." So he definitely didn't pander to me, which they were coddle me in that regard. All my brothers and sisters went to university. I didn't go because I wanted to be a musician, and he was okay with that. He was completely cool with that. He was really into the idea of merit. You want something, you work for it, you deserve it, and you get it. We're not going to hand you stuff. We're not going to hand you a car when you're 16. We're not going to hand you. We're not going to hand you anything, really. When I was 16, my dad said I had to start paying rent.
Oh, wow.
When I first got a job, I was like, "What are you kidding? What do you need the money for?"
Teach a
Not that he
lesson, I
had that
guess.
much money, but he just said, "It's not. I don't need the money, but I want you to understand that things have value, and that what you're getting in this house, there's a price tag on it." And I think that was, and they didn't do it to try to crush me. They did it to try to empower me. And I think that was sort of a good thing. And I think we do live in a world of coddled kids nowadays where everything is a little bit entitled. And I think I'm a little bit guilty of that myself. I think my kids had it a little bit safer than I had it. growing up. Some of the stuff some of the stuff I think is better than I got as a kid. I really enjoy playing with my kids, doing adventures with my kids, traveling with my kids. But at the same time, I hope I'm not stunting their growth in a lot of ways as well too.
I like that too, and that's one of the Rad Dads Show, like our podcast, is actually an extension of a group called Rad Dads Edmonton, which is a group that I started about 6-7 years ago to promote positive parenting and empower dads and get them involved in the
Sure.
community. And one of the things that we do is provide events for families, and and those events, I guess, would be maybe radical, a little bit different than the norm. So like, I sing in a punk rock cover band called Dad Religion, and we're known for our toddler mosh pits, and so we provide an opportunity for parents to bring their younger
That's funny.
kids to see some kind of the punk music and stuff like that in an
I didn't
environment
let
that
my
is safe.
kids. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't let my kids listen to Youth of Today because I cursed in every like 20 times as per song.
I guess the point kind of being that, like, did some of that stuff that your dad, I guess, taught you kind of rub off with your kids? Like, do you um it doesn't sound like you ask them to pay rent, but do you have them kind of do some of those things that he did in terms of not providing as much as you would have?
Um, probably a little, probably a little, maybe not as much. Like I said, it's not like my dad was perfect. There was a lot of a lot of shortcomings as well. But now as a dad, I'm appreciating. I think it takes a step to start to appreciate everything your father gave you as well. And my father had 7 kids, and he had a school teacher's budget, and uh, I have a great appreciation for him just showing up and dealing with it, and dealing with a bunch of kids in the midst of when drugs started taking over high schools, which was unprecedented. I think it's all kicked in 1968 when my older siblings were around, and he had to deal with all the stress of that. So, yeah, I probably have a little bit of both running through me. I probably got a little bit of his temper, which which I which I which I tried to put a cap on because he had a temper. My father would, it's an Italian father, so I'd get whacked around a lot by my father. I never felt like the getting whacked or getting hit was made me feel. I never felt abused from it, but he definitely hit us. Or I don't know if you were from a generation that did that.
Yeah, I
And
got a spanking.
that, yeah, I got a ruler. I got a ruler, but it never left a welt on me or anything. I never felt like I I would handle it differently, but I don't think it screwed me up. Maybe certain therapists would disagree with me. But I will say it is one way to keep order, and we were incredibly orderly. Me and my to manage 7 of us, we'd go into a store. My mother just told me this recently. He goes, "You guys would go into a store and just stand there patiently." Dad would say, "Stand there and wait for me." And we just stand like obedient dogs. We just stand. Nowadays, kids just do anything they want, and you can't even reprimand it. Back then, we used to be scared of the people in department stores. Like if I was playing in the bicycle section and riding a bike in the store, you couldn't do that. The guy in the store would scream at you. You can't scream at a kid now in a store. Now it's like lawlessness. I think that there's got to be some type of balance between getting yelled at, chastised by a neighbor, to where there is no laws and kids are so out of control. There's no respect for elders. Yeah, we got to find some balance. What do you think about that, Christian?
Yeah, I agree. I'm actually a school teacher as well. I've been
Oh my God, I'm so sorry what you guys are going through right now. The roles have reversed. It's as if the inmates have taken over the prison. I don't know how you deal with it. Just seeing what it's like and the lack of respect. And I'm sure a lot has to do with you and how you handle yourself with the kids. But I feel for public school teachers especially.
Yeah, it's tough. I've taught, so I'm going into my 23rd year as a teacher, and
Oh wow.
when I first started teaching, I teach high school science, and when I first started teaching, cell phones were just coming in, and it was. So I've seen that evolution of that, the advent of social media and cell phones, and really, students being addicted to them, and it's a challenge. Yeah, definitely. It's right now our school district is, I guess our province, our government has kind of mandated that cell phones be banned or not allowed in school. Although some districts already have had those sorts of things, policies in place. But there's parents out there screaming that they think that their students or their kids should be still allowed cell phones in school. So you're fighting kind of that, right? Where it's like we as the education experts kind of know that this is damaging to the students during
Or
class, but then you have the parents fighting us saying, well, I want to be able to access my kid at any time. It's like, well, why? Like they should be reading or doing math, and so that's the
right.
fight for me personally. It hasn't really been an issue because, as you kind of mentioned, I think it's the relationship that you build, but it's also kind of what you teach. I teach physics and chemistry, so generally I have students that are looking at going on to post-secondary and pretty focused for the most part, and so it's just a matter of saying, hey, put your phone away, and they're usually compliant in that sense.
Yeah, or maybe like turn it in as you go into the classroom. Put it in the
Yeah,
basket,
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. And but then like the flip side too, I taught a course, an entrepreneurial course all around skateboarding and urban culture, where students had to
Mm.
create their own brand, and we built handmade skateboards. I basically call it like merch booth 101, where I kind of go through that whole DIY kind of thing. We would make buttons, t-shirts, that sort of thing around their brand, and then sell them at the end of the thing. But a lot of the stuff that we did was on their phone. And so when you have a class where I'm like encouraging to use their phone, take pictures of this, post it to social media, we're going to look at marketing, that sort of thing,
So
using it
funny.
as a tool. But then at the same time, I'm teaching physics in another class. Okay, put it away because I want to talk to you about quantum mechanics right now.
That
So
is funny. It's like almost like in the way kids have careers through social media or careers through they learn marketing through it. It's quite fascinating.
yeah,
Part
it's
of
quite
us wants to take it away, and part of it wants to give. We could be taking away everything that is their livelihood. Um, you know,
yeah,
we
it's
didn't have that. Well, we created record labels when I was a teenager, and we created our band logos and our band T-shirts. It was a peculiar time because there was film in cameras. You know what I mean? There was film in cameras, and there was no word processors. It's hard to even believe. Like if we wanted to do a layout of a record, we'd have to go to a typesetter, and they'd have to type. We'd have to pick the fonts from a font book, and it's hard to even believe that. I sound like an old man. I guess I am an old man, but it's hard to believe that even existed. It's like how they printed books in the 1900s or something, but that's how we had to do it. Now there's very tool, which is distracting them and causing us, so many uh, problems, psychological problems, as well as body dysmorphia problems, is also sort of their access to making a career for themselves as well. Yeah, it's a slippery slope you got ahead of you as a school teacher in the Western world now. It's a very slippery slope. How much to give into it, how much to pull back. But maybe that's what those classes are for, you know?
what ways of fatherhood changed you, or did it?
Mm. I mean, the biggest thing is it just made you, I feel like it made me, when I got married, my wife had two little boys. So I went from sort of doing anything I wanted whenever I wanted, which was I did, you know, yoga for 2 hours in the morning, and I do martial arts later in the afternoon for 2 hours, and I pretty much did that every day. Um, and then I'd go on tour, and so it was this thing where it's sort of like once I got married and had children, it made me like, oh, everything I have to do has to be like exemplary. And I realized, like, what do I know? I have to teach these kids something. They were little, they were like 5 and 6. So I had to realize, like, okay, what can I teach them? I didn't really feel like qualified. I took no course in this. So I just sort of like, it sort of made me man up, at least psychologically, to zip up my life, which was a huge thing, I think, for a guy to grow up and for a guy to grow up out of like, do whatever you want world. For me, it was incredibly grounding. So I was incredibly grateful, especially for those two kids, because it really grounded me
Mm.
at a time where I was just sort of floating around doing whatever I wanted. It taught me a type of selflessness, which is an important thing, I think, which people get when they do things that are tough. You got to do things for a greater cause and a greater good. You know, people get that when they join a team or join the military or have it raise children, that you do something, you sacrifice something for selfishness for a greater good, and that was great, especially with children. Um, and I think to instill that type of appreciation in the heart is just a sign of sort of an adulthood. So I didn't get married till I was like, I was 38 maybe. It was a little later, a little maybe later in life. But it helped me grow up in a lot of ways that a book can't teach you how to do it. You just gotta you sort of just dove into it.
Right. Did you have any fears about being a dad?
I had total fears, and then I ended up with a lady who had two kids, and so I was forced to overcome those fears real damn quick. It wasn't like I was thinking about having a baby, or we got into a relationship, and I realized, like, okay, if I want to pursue this, this is a complete package. This isn't just the lady. This is the lady and the deluxe package. I have to step into a parenting role. And so I just that day I just said, you know what? I'm going to choose this. And I think that's important for a person who's becoming a step parent too. Not that we try to become, sometimes there is a father and another father in the picture, a birth father in the picture, a biological father in the picture, but you do have to still play a role as a senior, as another father. So you have to, and it's important, even if you're attracted to the girl but don't want the kids, you can't do that. You have to accept the complete package of what this lady or what this man is. And I think that's important to do, or else the kids will always feel like they're in the way and they'll feel like their mom sold them out to this guy. And you have to step into that role, loving, supportive, there for the person as another father figure, and let them know that you're there for them. There has to be some love. It can't just be like, yeah, these kids are in the periphery. They can eat. I'll buy them food, but there's got to be some love there. And I think that's an important facet of being that dad.
Yeah, for sure. I can relate to that. So the girlfriend, my partner, my girlfriend that I'm with, uh, so there's three kids between us. She had one from a previous relationship. He just turned 16, and my son from a previous relationship is 12, and then we have one who's almost 2 years old together. And
Mm,
so,
okay.
I totally kind of
So you got a little
understand that
Brady
kind
Bunch
of
thing going
a
on here. I
yeah,
get that.
for sure. Did that kind of, you kind of talked about how it made you a bit nervous, and then you kind of had to kind of step up, and you thought about, okay, what can I teach these kids? Did that come naturally to you? Kind of curious, like in
For
terms of
me,
like who you are as Ray, like thinking
yeah,
about your book and how you were in a band, and correct me if I'm wrong with this assertion here. You were in a band that really promoted that positive lifestyle, and some would argue that you were a teacher on stage in terms of your lyrics in that piece, and there was this natural transition or progression to going to India and becoming a teacher. Like, you are a yoga
right.
teacher, you are a spiritual teacher. Does that come natural to you in terms of being
For
a
me,
teacher?
I think, people have certain callings in this world, and musical callings or physical callings or artistic callings or mathematical callings. I was always a natural leader from my childhood. And I was a natural teacher for my childhood. And so when I had the opportunity to step into being a dad, it was something I really cherished. I still cherish it. Cherish with little kids, I found it even more rewarding. Actually, I found it I find it very rewarding now with older kids because it's fun. It's a different version of the same thing, but I love fathering. I think it's does that sound right? I love fathering. I love being a father. It's a very for at least my psychological makeup, I like to take care. I like to protect. I like to nurture and stuff like that. So it did come natural for me. And for the longest time, I was with another lady that didn't want to have children. And so I sort of adopted that. Yeah, who needs kids? Kids are a hassle and stuff like that. But once I got together with my ex-wife who had kids, I loved being a father. I loved it.
What are the most rewarding aspects of being a dad?
At first I thought it was reciprocal, like a reciprocal love you get. But I don't think in retrospect, I don't, because there is especially with little children, there's a lot of reciprocation for the love that you give. Um, but now I'd say maybe 25 plus years in being a dad, I don't feel it's reciprocal. I feel like you learn to love for the sake of loving, not to get some kickback on the other side. You learn to love because it makes you learn to love. And sometimes you love and you get nothing in return. And that's okay because what happening is you're learning to love. And I think that's actually a spiritual thing is I think we're born in this world self-absorbed. Self-absorbed. How can I get my needs met? How can I get fed? How can I enjoy my senses? And we forget actually how to develop selfless love. And I think that's part of the journey of the soul is how can I learn to love without expecting some bartering system with the person that I'm loving. And I think originally that's meant to be reposed in God, but we get trained in the people around us. Can we learn to love people that aren't necessarily going to give us something back? First, we start with like the 101 class, which is, can I love little kids? And oftentimes little kids are really reciprocal with your love. And then sometimes teenagers can be, you can do so much for them, but they can go through a certain point where they're just completely oblivious to how much you've given them. And you have to learn to love that as well. That's sort of PhD in loving,
Mhm.
and if you have no kids, you still get those lessons in life because we find people that love us. Those are people that are very easy to love. But then you'll find people that you have to learn to love despite them even being jerks or being almost like they repel love. Um, and that's also important is can I learn to love people that aren't lovable, that don't act in a lovable way? And I think that's part of our spiritual growth as humans, as spiritual beings. I learned to love again. And so that I think is the like sort of the greatest lesson in parenting. It starts off simple. Can you love these adorable kids that look like you, that act like you, that speak like you, that look up to you, that think you're like Superman to them? You know, that's easy.
Hmm. Lots of thoughts there. We'll get into maybe your book. I wanted to kind of touch on a few things there. One of my next questions is describing your relationship with your dad, and you kind of did a little bit. Did you want to maybe explore that a little bit, like what that relationship was like, and
My relationship with my dad.
yeah, where you
You
come
want
from?
more info on that?
Well,
Like I said, it was pretty like 1970s relationship with parents. Um, it was pretty it wasn't not affectionate. He was affectionate, but I think people parented different that way. Your dad back then, oftentimes, at least my friends that I talked to that are my age, they said my dad wasn't my friend. He was my dad.
mhm,
You know, he was the sort of the king of the household. He set up the rules of the household. Those rules are meant to be followed in the household, or there was like consequences in the household, and it sort of created and he was and his rule. The rule was what the parent was. He will maintain you. He'll take care of you, in charge of your food and your medical and your it sounds sort of loveless, but it felt loved. I think I felt loved. I felt like he cared for me. Um, but there was a little bit more of a order to the household, and but at the same time, he was strong, but he was loving. But it wasn't loving how I express love with my kids. I'm really tactile and really um affectionate. Maybe it's because I was 6 out of 7 kids. Maybe by the time I came around, he was a little bit more like, okay, I'm exhausted. I get that because I'm with my fifth child. I think I'm like, I can't. Please stop talking. Please stop talking. Please stop talking. This I met my match. The only kid I know can talk more than me. But so I don't know what else is to explore except that was like the parenting in the 1970s. And perhaps I'm not speaking for everybody. There was a TV show back then. I don't know if you remember this. It was called The Courtship of Eddie's Father, and it was about this single dad raising a kid. And I remember one particular episode. The kid was like, "Dad, why don't you ever spank me?" Jimmy's father gets spanked, and when Jimmy asked his father why he spanked him, he said, "Well, I spank him because I love you. I spank you because I love you and I want to teach you. And you never spanked me. Do you love me?" And it was like this whole thing about it was sort of like a very progressive dad show. I was like, my dad does not watch this show at all. I've got a dad from some other previous from some previous time in history, a prehistoric dad. Um, anyway, I don't know what your parenting was like, but that was my
Yeah, I didn't, my dad kind of left, my parents separated when I was relatively young, about 9, 10 years old. And so my dad really wasn't involved in my life for a
mm,
long period of time. And I think subconsciously, maybe this is why I kind of started this whole dad sort of thing. And he didn't really come into my life until I was just entering university. And then shortly after, being reintroduced into my life and being part of it, he committed suicide actually.
oh
So
God.
about 20 years ago. And so it's just a rocky road. He's one that hardworking man, worked himself to death in a sense, and wasn't I personally, you talk about like college, it was like same thing. It's like, okay, I'm done high school, go to university. Was at university and, did my master's degree. Like, so education has been really, really important and it's provided me a lot of opportunities. And, he barely finished grade 8, for example. And so we have kind of this dichotomy. And I haven't, the when he obviously when he passed away, it was sad. And but at the same time, I feel kind of guilty when I say this to people, a little bit relieved at the sense, because it was just so taxing, that relationship, and I didn't really know how
Mm,
to navigate it at the time. But now that when I became a father, it's like, oh shit, I really miss him, in a sense that it would be nice to have some sort of guidance at times.
sure.
If that makes sense. And I
Mm,
also I also understand he must have been in a lot of pain for him to do that. Him being a father of three, I have a brother and sister, and
mm,
me being a father of two right now, and to actually, I think a lot about that, like that act, and what he did, and the pain he must have been in. And so it's heartening to kind of think about it when I go kind of down that path. So that's my relationship with my dad. And my mom passed away about 5 years ago, and she struggled with addiction near the end of her life, and things like
wow.
that. So that was a bit of a struggle. But yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah, these are tough things. So in that sense, it's like life is hard,
Yeah.
and my parents gave me some type of stability. At the same time, I'm sure they made a lot of mistakes raising kids. Nowadays, I think in our generation also, we were new to divorce. No one was divorced back then. People stayed in very, very broken, dysfunctional marriages, abusive, perhaps violent marriages. Um, I never knew anybody who was divorced when I was growing up. And when it started happening in the mid 70s, we were all shocked. They were like the black sheep of the family. And at least where I grew up, that's what I can say. Now we're and also sometimes the divorce was the parents would say, okay, you live one kid lives with the mom, one kid lives with the dad, and it's all of a sudden you're separated from a sibling and you don't even see them. And I think now things are becoming they're figuring out how to work it with split families and how to make things more equitable and things like that. Um, yeah, and oftentimes, like you're sharing, sort of like you almost have to be the parent when you have a mother who's has addiction issues, or the father who disappeared, who was absent, and that creates a lot of stress on the kid. And like you said, relieved almost, which is it's horrible to think like that, but completely understandable like that too.
Yeah.
So it's left us with these confusing emotions. So appreciation for all that you're doing now, trying to almost reinterpret and almost recalibrate being a dad. It makes me understand maybe even why you're doing what you do, also. And sometimes sometimes I think it's important to say, okay, I got this bloodline that I'm born into, that I'm picking up all the traits from, and it needs to stop right here, and I'm gonna do a do-over.
Mhm.
And perhaps maybe that's what you're doing right now with your life and your
I
kids.
agree. And, and you talk about, in your book, and I guess just your whole like existence with, youth of today and shelter and that stuff about, being sober and being, I guess,
Mm,
if lack of better words, straight edge. And um, not saying that I'm straight edge or anything, but I haven't consumed alcohol for about over a year and a half or so, and it was a conscious choice because my mom did remarry. We had a stepdad, and every day he would come home and crack open a beer and basically drink a six to eight pack and pass
well,
on the couch, and that kind of became what I would see all of the time. And while I was kind of near the end of high school and stuff, and I always told myself I never wanted to be that way.
right.
But lo and behold, what had happened is I became that way. And I
Wow.
just woke up one day, I'm like, screw this. And anyways, that's just kind of a side story. It's just interesting that you kind of use that word, that bloodline, and and
Yeah, it's
I don't
real.
know. Yeah. And you kind of see this, and then you get into these patterns. And then if you don't recognize that they are patterns, and it's just wild to me. And so a lot of that stuff that you kind of talk about in your book too kind of resonated with me. Like, even one thing I wanted to kind of bring up, like, it really has nothing to do with like how you gave away all. You had a big record collection, you kind of gave them away. And that, like, right now, I was literally like, I collect records as well, a big SNFU fan, being from Edmonton and whatnot, but I have this insane collection, and I spent a fair amount of money on it. And then I just look at it someday, I'm like, why?
Yeah, exactly. Is it pleasure from the self or pleasure from the ego?
Yeah. Anyways,
And
so
sometimes you say, well, it's pleasure from memories and pleasure from this and pleasure from that. Okay, well, it's all available on Spotify.
right.
It's like, oh, yeah. Yeah, there's definitely elements of I get my parts of my identity from it, from the things that I have in this world. We get, I mean, in the grossest way, we get it. Okay, I am my Mercedes, or I am my, real estate, or I am my, you know, uh, you know, coin collection, whatever people do to collect, and they find their identity, or I am my career, and so we, on a lower level, we're like, I am my, rare Discord records.
Mhm.
That too. We find our identity in that, and I think part of our material identity is a big part of what we've been cultivating for this lifetime, and therefore, when it gets taken away from us, which it always does, everything that we have gets taken away from us in one time or another. It's a little devastating. I remember being a young man before I gave those records away. I had some really valuable ones in my backseat of my car. And you probably remember this, where like you're driving around and you go into the store and you come back out and you realize your records are in the car and it's a sunny day and I've warped like 3 of my most valuable records. And kids don't have that problem anymore, but you leave the records in the car in the sun and they just warped. And
Yeah,
you're like, okay, it's officially useless now.
different world.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So let's wrap her up here, Ray. I'd like you to, talk about, what's next for you. Your book is out. Great book. I highly recommend it. I really
Oh,
enjoyed
thanks so
it. So
much.
so thanks for sharing your story.
And it's a great gift if you got if you got a punk friend too,
Yeah.
or if you got a friend that's on a spiritual journey, or a punk friend that's not just a fan, but sort of like I wrote it in such a way that wherever you are in your life, you can extract some type of wisdom from my mistakes, you know. Um, and so yeah, it's a good. People have been saying, yeah, I want to get one as a gift for a friend. That's what I've been finding a lot lately too.
Nice. So yeah, so you have your book, you have a podcast, you have is Shelter doing any shows? I think I saw
Well,
somebody did some
part of
shows.
supporting the book, if you just write a book and if you just write a book, the publisher has you do a book tour,
Mhm.
But because I'm in a band and I'm a yoga teacher and I do public speaking, um, we put our heads together. I said, well, I'll just play some shows and I'll do some yoga gigs and stuff like that. So I'm doing that. We're playing some shows in December with Shelter and um, South America in Brazil. They're putting out the book, so I'm doing some shows in Brazil. I'll do some shows in Europe next year, and I'm doing some yoga workshops and stuff like that. And in the meantime, I'm working on a second book also, which is not about my story, but it's about taking like spiritual transformational information written in about written from the point of yogis from ancient India and how to make it practical and relevant today and how to transform your life. But I try to make it in a way that's sort of very understandable.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. Any words of wisdom you'd like to leave for dads or future dads out there listening?
For future dads, love without expecting reciprocation. Or else we're going into something that's uh, or else love becomes a transaction. It's not really That's not really love. If you buy you know a loaf of bread for me for $1 and I give you the bread and you give me $1, that's not love. That's just a transaction. But if I give you bread because you look hungry and I want you to eat the bread, then that's it. That's a beautiful transaction. So that's all I can say. I'm not saying I'm a master at it. It's nice when you do get some reciprocation, but it's not the goal. It's actually to learn how to love again.